Oh, today is gonna be really entertaining. So last night I was doing some surfing and I came across this lady's page, or what? Well, it wasn't really her YouTube page. It was somebody else's page. She was on somebody else's page, and bro, like, I clicked on it and watched like the first 30 seconds and I got pretty interested in it. But I don't want to say too much because that's what today's episode going to be about, So thank y'all for joining. For the real ones, y'all know the other candle went out. So starting with a new one. Man, today gonna be crazy though. It's gonna be crazy because getting this type of, I wouldn't really call it information, but I mean evidence. I really call it information to have this type of information and to know that it's really being covered up in mainstream I guess you can call it mainstream biblical ship. I guess you can call it that or whatnot. Sorry about the long pause, y'all. My dog has been going crazy, you know what I'm saying? So I apologize for that. So, but anyway, I had a little slip up there or whatnot. But anyway, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the Jewish Skeptic. It's your boy CJ Everson, and let's dive into this new information I got about Paul last night. So, is Paul even real? I don't know. Let's find out. So, was Paul even real, y'all? Let's talk about Paul. Because for a lot of the Christians out here, man, Paul is treated like historical, concrete evidence. Like, they quote Paul like he is courtroom evidence, bro. I mean, I've seen them act like Paul is like a verified eyewitness of Jesus. I've seen them quote Paul like his letters drop out of heaven like with a divine signature at the bottom of the letter. Like, bro, slow down though. Before we even get to Paul's theology, before we argue about salvation, grace, law, resurrection, or Jesus appearing to him from heaven, I want to ask a more basic question. Can we prove Paul is real? Like, and I already know some people are going to react to that question. They're going to say something like, oh, of course Paul was real. I mean, he wrote letters. See, slow your horses, buddy. Slow down a little bit. See, that answer assumes the conclusion already though. So slow it down. If the question is whether Paul wrote the letters, you can't use the letters by themselves as automatic proof that Paul wrote them. Well, at least that's my issue. That's the issue. And let me be clear from the beginning. I'm not saying I can't prove Paul never existed. I'm not saying that at all, y'all. I'm not saying everybody who believes in a historical Paul has a mind problem or stupid or anything like that. And I'm not saying that this debate is actually settled. So let me be clear when I say that too. But what I am saying is that the Paul Christians inherited is not as airtight as they pretend it is, bro. There's a difference between saying Paul probably existed and saying Paul has actually been, independently verified in the way believers often imply. Those are two different claims, if you ask me. And if we're going to be honest, we have to separate three different versions of Paul. First, you have the theological Paul. That is the Paul that Christians preach, That is the man chosen by God, called by Jesus, inspired by the Holy Spirit, and trusted as an apostle. Then we got the second Paul, which is the literary Paul. The voices inside of Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, and all them other letters that's connected to his name. And then you got a historical Paul. That would be a first century person we could verify behind the letters. You know what I'm saying? So my question is simple. Can we clearly move from the literary Paul to the historical Paul? Is it clear for us to make that move? And let me be fair. The mainstream scholarly position is that Paul probably existed and that 7 letters are usually treated as authentic. I just named a few of them a minute ago. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Thessalonians, and all of those books. And I'm going to be honest, that is the common position in mainstream biblicalship. That is the common position. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. Most scholars still think that there was a historical Paul. And most scholars still think at least some letters go back to him. So if someone says Paul probably existed, to me, that's really not a wild claim. That is actually the mainstream view. Just being honest. But here's where the conversation, to me, gets very interesting. Mainstream does not mean untouchable, though. And the consensus does not mean the questions just disappear. Because we still have to ask, what kind of evidence we actually have. Do we have Roman records confirming Paul of Tarsus? I'll let you think on that. Think on this one too. Do we have Jewish court documents confirming his role? Think about this one. Do we have a Sanhedrin list with Paul's name sitting there? Because remember, he was supposed to be from the Sanhedrin. Do we have 1st century inscription saying Paul was here? No, we do not. Not one stitch. Nothing. Not zilch. What we mostly have are letters attributed to Paul, Acts talking about Paul, and later Christian tradition remembering Paul. Now, that may be enough to make Paul probable, but is it enough to make Paul beyond question? And this is where last night comes in at. This is where Dr. Nina Livesey's, did I say her name right? Livesey's, work becomes important in my opinion. Livesey is not saying that Paul was wrong. She's not simply arguing against Paul's theology. She is challenging the foundation underneath the so-called authentic letters. And in her book that I kind of skimmed through, I posted it on Facebook too, the letters of Paul in their Roman literary context. She argues that the letters traditionally treated as authentic Pauline letters may actually be pseudodominus. I think I said that right. That means they were written in Paul's name. She also argues they may be letters in form only. In regular language, that means they look like real personal letters, but function more like literary teaching documents, if that makes sense. And what she does, she connects their emergence to the mid second century, usually, and especially around the Roman school of Marcion. And me figuring that out, that's what mattered to me, because if she is right, then the issue is bigger than Paul. I mean, it's bigger than did Paul misunderstand Jesus. The issue to me becomes, was the Paul we inherited created, shaped, or backdated by later Christian communities? And that is a serious question, from at least from my thought it is. And before somebody says that sounds like conspiracy, no, it's not. This is not a random TikTok theory or Facebook flat earth conspiracy. This is published scholarship from Cambridge. I mean, you can disagree with it. You can challenge it. You can walk side with mainstream all you want to. But you can't honestly act like the question itself is forbidden. That's what religious people often do when scholarship makes them uncomfortable. They never answer the question. They panic at the fact that the question even exists. Why is that? I don't know, but history does not care about your comfort. History is going to ask for the sources. History is going to ask for dates. History is going to ask for who benefits from the text. History is going to ask whether the explanation fits the time period. And Livesey is saying whether the Paul of the letters fit better in second century Christian world than the first century one. Now, you have to ask yourself, why does that matter? It's because the second century is when Christianity starts to become more clearly separated from Judaism. This is after major Jewish conflicts with Rome. This is around the time when debates about Jewish law and identity and Gentiles, all that stuff became extremely charged. It was all during that same time. And the boy Marcion is a major figure here because Marcion loved Paul. I mean, Marcion's Christianity was heavily centered on Paul the Apostle. Marcion pushed a sharp divide between the God of the Jewish scriptures and the God revealed through Jesus. So when we have a version of Christianity trying to separate itself from Judaism, Paul becomes very useful in my thought. Paul is like the perfect character for the fight. A Jewish figure who argues against requiring Gentiles to be circumcised. Y'all know Paul was against the law. I mean, a former persecutor who becomes champion of the new movement. And also, I mean, a man who claims his gospel didn't come from human beings. That's powerful. I mean, also a voice that could say, I got this straight from Revelation. That's powerful. But I say it on this show all the time. Powerful does not automatically mean historical. A character can be useful without being fully real. A literary figure can shape a entire movement. And my thoughts is a constructed apostle can still become authoritative. And that might be the part that a lot of people miss. So let me slow down. When skeptics question Paul, Christians often respond, well, Paul changed history. Okay. So did other fictional characters. So did legends. So did national myths. Stories people believe that were true. I mean, that's all influence. And influence only proves influence, people. That's it. It does not prove biography. Now, again, I'm not saying Paul was definitely fake. But what I am saying is the possibilities deserves to be discussed. The safe, honest position is this. Paul may have existed. Maybe he existed. But the Paul we have access to comes through text only. And those texts have to be examined. They don't get no special treatment because Christians built doctrine on them. Now let's talk about the manuscript. I know somebody probably finna go crazy in the comments out there, because y'all won't never let me make it. The earliest surviving manuscript collection of Paul's letter is actually not from Paul's lifetime. It's not from the 50s. It's not from the 60s. One of the earliest major witnesses is, I think it's Papyrus 46. I think that's it. Fact check me. Papyrus 46, which is often dated around late 2nd or early 3rd century, I think, around 200 Common Era. I brought that up because I think that's important, and I think it's important not because it proves that Paul didn't exist, because it doesn't prove that, but it does remind us that the physical manuscript evidence we possess comes much later than the Paul Christians imagine standing there with a pen in his hand. So when someone says Paul wrote Romans, the historical question is not answered by confidence. It's answered by evidence. You know, what manuscript do we have? How late is it? Who preserved it? What community valued it? You know, what theological fight was happening around it? We still got to ask more questions. And those questions matter. And this is why I say Christians often confuse tradition with verification. A tradition can be old and still not be independently confirmed. I got to sip some tea after that. I said again, a tradition can be old and still not be independently confirmed. A claim can be early and still not be supernatural. A letter can be ancient and still be pseudonymous. That is not skepticism being unfair. That is how ancient history works. Let's be fair to the other side, though. There are scholars who push back against Livesey. They do. They have arguments, but she seems to be standing her ground. Some say the letters feel too specific to be literary inventions. That's what some of the other scholars say. They mention local problems, personal names, a messy church drama, money collections, and travel plans, and all kind of the details that feel like correspondence. But others argue that Paul's apocalyptic urgency fits the first century better than the second. So let me bring that back around for the people I may have lost. So in other words, Paul writes like someone who expects the end to come soon. Some scholars say that makes more sense close to the earliest Jesus movement than in the later period where Christians were already adjusting to the delay of Jesus's return. And that is the real pushback. And I want to include that because I'm not here to sell you a lazy answer. I'm not here to say, Livesey said it, so that means case closed. That would be the same mistake religious people make with their favorite authorities. The better point is this. The mainstream view says Paul probably existed. But Dr. Livesey challenges whether the letters give us real first century Paul at all. The pushback says the letters still look historically grounded. So what I'm looking historically grounded, where does that leave us? It leaves us with uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what believers just don't want to admit. Christianity uses Paul with confidence. Paul says this, Paul teaches that, and Paul proves early belief. He confirms the resurrection and he validates the gospel. But slow down, like I said earlier, hold on. Before Paul can prove anything, Paul has to be established. And even if Paul is established, his claims still need verification. Let's say Paul was real. Fine. That still does not prove Jesus appeared to him. A person can be real and be mistaken. A person can be sincere and wrong. I say it all the time, and loud and wrong. People can have a religious experience and misinterpret it. Like I said, many other religions have religious experiences. Muslims, Hindus, Mormons, Zoroastrians, People in every religion have moments where they feel touched by something bigger than themselves. So, Paul saying he had a revelation, it does not settle the question. It only tells us what Paul or the text in Paul's name claims. And I'm sorry, but that's just not enough. And if Paul was not real, or if the Paul we inherited is mostly a literary construction, then Christians have a deeper problem. Because now their strongest early witness becomes a theological voice created by later communities. Wowzers. Now the question changes from what did Paul say to who needed Paul to say this. That question might be dangerous for that doctrine, because Paul is not a small figure in Christianity. Paul is huge. He's gargantuan. Paul shaped Christianity's relationship with Gentiles. Paul shaped debates about law. He shaped ideas about grace, faith, and spirit, flesh, and sin, and resurrection, and church order, and salvation, bruh. I'm pretty sure I could keep going. A massive amount of Christian theology runs through that boy Paul. And if Paul becomes historically unstable, Christianity don't just lose a side character, man. It loses one of its main architects. And that is why this conversation matters, because many Christians do not actually follow Jesus first. Y'all follow Paul's interpretation of Jesus. They read Jesus through Paul. They read the Hebrew Bible through Paul. They read salvation through Paul. They read the law through Paul. Then they turn around and act like questioning Paul is the same as attacking God. No. It is not the same. I am questioning a historical claim, y'all. I am questioning authorship. I am questioning evidence. I am questioning whether a literary voice should be treated like divine authority. And to me, this is not rebellion. This is reading with the lights on. Here's the simplest version of this. The Bible gives us a Paul. We can agree with that. The church preaches a Paul. Scholarship debates Paul. But can we independently verify Paul with the confidence Christians use when quoting him? That is the issue. And if someone wants to say Paul probably existed, I can work with that. I think that's fair. But if they say Paul existed, therefore Christianity is true, you lost me. If they say Paul wrote the letters, therefore God inspired him, you lost me again. If they say Paul had a vision, therefore Jesus rose from the dead, now they are doing theology, not history. The honest skeptic does not have to claim Paul was definitely fake. The honest skeptic only has to ask what the evidence actually proves. And I'm going to be honest. Right now, the evidence does not show, it does not prove that Paul spoke for God. It does not prove that Jesus appeared to Paul. It does not prove divine inspiration. And it does not prove Christianity. At best, under the mainstream view, it supports a probable historical Paul. And under Livesey's challenge, even that gets more complicated. And that is the point of this episode. I'm not saying Paul never existed. I am saying Christians need to stop acting. They need to stop acting like the historical Paul is beyond question. Because once you separate the theological Paul, the literal Paul, and the historical Paul, the whole argument becomes less comfortable. The theological Paul belongs to faith. The literary Paul belongs to text. And the historical Paul still has to be proven. And if Christians want to use Paul as proof, they have to do more than quote Paul, because quoting the claim does not verify the claimant. So, my final point is simple. Paul may have changed Christianity, and Paul may have shaped the church. Paul may have influenced history more than almost anyone after Jesus. But influence is not evidence of divine truth. And before Christians use Paul to prove God, they need to prove Paul first. Because Paul may be history. Paul may be literary memory. He may be a reconstructed apostle shaped by second century Christian debates. But none of those options prove that God spoke through him. A real Paul could still be wrong. A literary Paul could still be powerful. And a constructed Paul could still change history. But no version of Paul gets to bypass evidence, y'all. And that is the difference between faith and history. Faith protects the story. History interrogates it. And when it comes to Paul, the interrogation is long overdue. Remember, No fear, no dogma, just clarity. Once again, I am CJ Everson, the Jewish Skeptic. See you guys on the next one. Take care.
Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know.